Garrett Hake in Davenport, Iowa. Joining me now for further discussion on this, Cornell Belcher, Democratic pollster and strategist. Laurie Watkins, former Obama advisor who served as Florida policy director in 2012 in the re-election campaign. And Greg Sargent, Washington Post opinion writer covering national politics. Greg's latest column about Joe Biden is titled, "Biden is Getting It Wrong on Trump and the GOP." And Greg, as Garrett said, Joe Biden released the transcript or released an outline of what he was going to say. You were able to write about it, and you're a little bit puzzled by the approach Joe Biden is taking. You sort of outline that in doing so, he's appealing to working class Americans and some others, but you don't think it's correct.
Well, I think that empirically it's obvious that when Joe Biden says that once Trump is gone, if he's gone, everything will be just fine and peace will break out is obviously false. Nobody knows that better than Joe Biden himself, having lived through the Obama years, and of course, which culminated in the Merrick Garland fiasco. I do think, though, that on some level, Biden believes to some degree that Republicans can be won over. To what degree he actually believes that's a little tough to say, but what was interesting to me was I talked to a campaign aide this morning, and he told me, to my surprise, that they actually believe that Democratic voters outside the Twitter universe that we're all consumed with all the time, that rank-and-file Democratic voters actually want to hear that the next Democratic president will successfully work with Republicans.
And Laurie, the fact is, and I want to show a piece of that Quinnipiac poll. We showed you the whole listing of how people do against Donald Trump, but in particular with Joe Biden, this Quinnipiac poll taken between June 6th and 10th indicates that Donald Trump would get 40% in a general election matchup, Biden at 53%. Is there some sense to what Joe Biden is arguing, in your opinion?
So Joe Biden needs to be out there. In my opinion, he needs to be out there a lot more than he has been. He needs to talk to voters. He needs to engage more with voters. I'll just give you an example. Last weekend here in the state of California was the state Democratic convention. Joe Biden decided to skip that. Not sure why, but he just needs to show up as much as humanly possible.
We sort of know why, right? We know, as Garrett says, he wants to punch up. He wants to be seen as the presumptive nominee. He
needs to act like it, right? And he needs to act like it. No more playing from the sidelines. Earlier, someone was saying about, giving a punch, a strong punch. Well, show everybody, show not just Democrats, show Republicans, and show those persuadable voters by getting off the sidelines and getting in there.
Cornell, what do voters want? What does the polling indicate in terms of the targeting Trump and not even really engaging with the other nominees, the other people who are seeking the nomination?
Well, let's dissect this a little bit, and thanks for having me on. One, look, if you go back to 2008, and when we were on the Obama campaign going up against Hillary Clinton, who's, by the way, her early primary numbers were a lot better than Joe Biden's were at this point, voters said they wanted someone who could win. And remember, Karl Rove was talking about a permanent Republican majority, so Democrats were hungry for the candidate they best thought could win, and Hillary Clinton certainly was polling at that at the time. However, there's always a change element. There's always a backlash against the establishment in Democratic primaries, and you always have that challenge. The problem for Joe Biden is this: if you look at the latest Iowa poll, he's at 70% or 70+% favorable in that poll, but he's garnering barely a quarter of the vote there. You have a lot of voters who know him and like him, but are still shopping around. So when he turns his attention to Donald Trump, he's framing this as him against Trump, but he's still got a lot of Democratic voters who are shopping around. I get the gamble that they're taking, but I think it's a really big gamble that's going to backfire.
It's an interesting point, shopping around, Greg, particularly in Iowa, where those unfamiliar with the caucusing system understand that if you go into a particular caucus and your candidate doesn't win, you literally shift corners. You go to someone else. So the idea of who else you're shopping around for or whom else you're considering is important. And in that polling in Iowa, Elizabeth Warren is right up there with Joe Biden.
Yes, absolutely. And to add to Cornell's point, I think we all forget this, but in 2008, there was a really robust argument over whether Obama was electable in the general election at all. We forget that. But, there were many people were arguing that he wasn't. And so when Biden adopts that as his front-runner strategy, you have to wonder whether at some point that's going to start to fade in the minds of voters who start to see some of these other candidates as being also electable.
Laurie, what's the strategy that works then? Is the idea still the same? And you think Joe Biden needs to get out there more? He's not lacking for media coverage. What should he do when he gets out there?
Well, when he gets out there, I think he needs to talk to part of the base that Greg referenced to in his article that seems to be missing, or that Joe Biden, seems to be missing in action. Predominantly white, suburban, college-educated folks and women. Where's all the conversations with women? We have female candidates out there. Elizabeth Warren, for example, she is gaining every week in the polls because she's showing voters that she has a plan. I asked these other candidates, what is your plan? And I asked Joe Biden, what's your plan?
And Cornell, does the plan business work? It does seem to be working for Elizabeth Warren at the moment. The idea that she's coming out with policy on a weekly basis. Joe Biden is basing his candidacy on the fact that you should know his policy because he was the vice president for 8 years.
Well, part of that problem is he still has to reintroduce himself to these voters. And look, if this campaign is primarily about who's going to be the best candidate to beat Donald Trump, which I think Biden wants that to be, I think that's solid footing for him. If it's about something bigger and broader, about sort of a progressive future, about who's going to lead a more progressive legislative battle, who's going to take on more progressive issues, where I think you have a lot of people in that field, Elizabeth Warren, et cetera, who can make that case just as good.
What do people want? Because that's the big conundrum, right? It does seem like slightly fewer Democrats want a more progressive candidate than want somebody to beat Donald Trump.
But and that's the thing, Ali. Voters are all over the place, and they're all often at conflict. I mean, again, go back to 2008 when they said they wanted the candidate who was most likely to win in the fall. But then there's always, and watch for this out, there's always a change backlash. There's always an element of the Democratic primary voters, and to a certain extent Republican primary voters, who backlash against and move against the establishment candidate, and they want a change candidate. The candidate who can break away and be the sort of the centerpiece of a changed progressive future, I think will give Biden a run for his money in the primary.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks to the three of you, Cornell Belcher, Laurie Watkins, and Greg Sargent. Nancy Pelosi today.